The Vendor of Sweets by R.K. Narayan. Chapter 2. A lull had fallen on Market Road when he walked back home at a little past 7:30. An enormous shaft of blue light fell on the road from the Krishna dispensary. He noticed Dr. Krishna at his table peering at the throat of a patient. A street dog lay snoring on a heap of stones on the roadside, kept there since the first municipal body was elected in free India in 1947 and meant for paving the road. A light was still seen under the door of Truth Printing, although it was shut in deference to the Shopping Hours Act. Jagan knew that if he knocked, Nataraj would open the door, and he would always have the excuse of asking if the book was ready. The book had been in the press for years out of count, his magnum opus on nature cure and natural diet. Jagan knew that Nataraj would say again that he was waiting for types, but he could always sit down in one of his chairs and discuss politics. He overcame the temptation and passed on. Must be home. The boy will be lonely, not today. He fell into a brooding and introspective state, and he walked on the edge of the road and was alone with himself. Jatkas drove past him with the drivers urging their horses with shrill cries, and then a few cycles, a scooter, and a couple of cars loudly honking their horns. The traffic thinned and disappeared, and he knew that he had come past Kabir Lane as no more light fell in the street for the shops. At the junction of Market Road, the lovely extension, there was a short parapet over the culvert. As usual, the vagrant was sitting on it, staring at passers-by and spitting into the gutter, and the donkey stood beside the wall as if it were offering itself for target practice. Jagan knew what the vagrant was waiting for the dying leaves to be cast out of the homes in Kabir Street. He would collect them, score them with his hands, and fill his belly with any vegetables and rice that might be left on them. The remedy would be for our nation to change its habits, for people to eat off plates and not use leaves for the purpose. The plates could be washed and kept, unlike the leaves, which are thrown out after dinner for vagrants to pick. Jagan reflected. He was for a moment racked with the problem of national improvement in various directions. If everyone discarded dining leaves, those engaged in the leaf trade would be thrown out of their profession, and an alternative engagement would have been found for them. But first, statistics should be taken of the percentage of the population eating off leaves. How many were engaged in gathering the dry leaves from the forest of Mempi and stitching them with little splinters, and how many in cultivating special banana leaves used for dining? Till all this was done on a national scale, this vagrant would continue to remain here. Late in the night he emerged from his covert and went down the street, crying at every door, "Oh, good mother, give a handful of rice for this hungry one." He had a deep voice which penetrated the door and reached the kitchen beyond. His tone has quietened troublesome children, as he was described to be a man with 3 eyes. "He is a disgrace to the nation," Jagan commented within himself, and by the time he reached the statue of Lowly and flung off, his head throbbed his head throbbed with several national and human problems and their ramifications. So Frederick Lowley faced the city. His back was supposed to be the back of beyond at one time, the limit of the city's expansion, but this prophecy was confounded when Lowly Extension, South Extension, and the new extension all stretched out beyond the statue. And Chagan's ancestral home, which had been the last house outskirting the city, became the first one for all the new colonies. As Jagan approached the statue, he felt a thrill, not at the spectacle of the enormous gentleman standing in a Napoleonic attitude, benignly surveying the history and fortunes of Malgudi in a grand sweep, but because he anticipated a glimpse of his son Mali on the other side of the statue. The pedestal had broad step all around and served as a park bench for the young and the old of the neighborhood. Pensioners, idlers, tired workmen, sickly citizens advised by their doctors to inhale fresh air sat facing east, west, north and south on the steps. Students leaning in on their cycles formed a group on the southern steps, all dressed in tight trousers and colorful shirts, hotly discussing film stars and cricket and fashions in dress and deportment. Jagan passed the statue on its north side so that he might not embarrass his son, but he liked to make sure that he was there. With a swift glance at the group, he spotted Mali by the uh, deep yellow of his shirt, and the brief glimpse filled him with joy. He tiptoed away, looking elsewhere, muttering to himself irrelevantly, poor boy, let him be." He was very proud of his son's height, weight, and growth. There are others, but he stands out among them. "I wonder what God has in store for him," he reflected. "Must give him more time." He reached home, his thoughts still hovering about his son. He let himself into his house, switched on the light in front of the room, took off his upper cloth and hung it on a nail in the wall, took off his jibba and thrust it into a basket for tomorrow's wash. He passed through the ancient house, through its triple series of open courtyards and corridors, and reached the back door, lifted the crossbar and let it down gently. He stood for a moment gazing at the stars, enthralled at the spectacle of the firmament. "One still wonders," he told himself, "but the problem remains. Who lives in those? We are probably glimpsing the real heaven and don't know it. Probably all our ancient sages are looking down at us. What are these constellations?" He couldn't be clear about that. His astronomy was limited to the location of the pole star of Orion's belt and sword, or some such point for which knowledge he had been awarded at second-class badge many years ago when he was a scout. His astronomy did not progress beyond that. For all the million stellar bodies sparkling. As far as jargon was concerned, they might not be more than the two he had been taught to identify. In addition to Orion and the pole star, he often noticed an extraordinary lively firework in the sky, which sometimes stood poised over the earth in the westerly direction. He sometimes called it Venus, sometimes Jupiter, never being sure but admiring it unreservedly and feeling proud that he was also a part of the same creation. All this was a habitual second of contemplation whenever he passed into the bathroom in the backyard. The bathroom was a shack roofed with corrugated sheets. Beaten out tin was affixed anyhow to a wooden frame to serve as a door on rusty hinges. The wooden frame was warped and the door never shut flush, but always left a gap through which one obtained a partial glimpse of anyone bathing. But it had been a house practice for generations for its members not to look through. This bathroom remained very much what it had been in the days of his father, who had resisted all suggestions for improvement, declaring, "After all, no one is expected to live in a bathroom. One had better come out of it soon, so that the rest may have a chance of tidying themselves." A very tall coconut tree loomed over the bath, shedding enormous withered fronds and other horticultural odds and ends on the corrugated roof with a resounding thud. Everything in this home had the scarcity of usage, which was the reason why no improvement was possible. Jargon's father, as everyone knew, had lived at first in a thatched hut at the very back of this ground. Jargon remembered playing in a sandy heap outside the hut. The floor of the hut was paved with cool clay, and one could put one's cheek to it on a warm day and feel heavenly. His father had also trained up a beanstalk onto the thatch and watched its development with anxiety. When he found some money, he put up the walls of the bathroom, laying the bricks with his own hands, and that became practically the starting point of the house. They fetched water from a well across the road and stored it in old kerosene tins and drums. His father expanded the house from the backyard to the front. As a child, Jargon had no notion how his father's fortune improved, although he heard vague words such as appeal, lawyers, lower court, and upper court. By the time he became an adult, capable of understanding these affairs, they were over and he never could explain what the litigations were about and against whom. There came a time when the hut was finally pulled down. Its thatches were used for heating a cauldron of water for the bath, and the cool mud floor was torn up and dug into pits for planting coconut seedlings. His father spent a whole week in these operations. Jargon and his brothers carried off baskets and shoveled earth, screaming with delight, "Let us build a mountain." Father had his theories of coconut rearing and filled the pits with great quantities of salt. "Salt is the only thing that can make a coconut tree grow," he remarked every day. Show me the man who can grow a coconut tree properly, and I will show you one with a practical head on his shoulders. Regularly at 5 in the morning, Jagan got up from bed, broke a twig from the magoza tree in the backyard, chewed its tip, and brushed his teeth. He was obsessed to the use of a toothbrush. The bristles are made of the hair from the pig's tail, he declared. It's unthinkable that anyone should bite a pig's tail first thing in the morning. It was impossible to disentangle the resources of his theories and say what he owed to Mahatmaji and how much he had imbibed from his father, who had also spent a lifetime perfecting his theories of sound living and trying them on himself, his coconut trees, children, and wife. Even after the advent of nylon bristles, Jagan never changed his views, maintaining that nylon had an adverse effect on the enamel. You disbelieve me? Remember my father who died at 90 without a single tooth loose in his jaw. Jagan had immense faith in the properties of Margosa, and in spite of its bitterness, he called it Amrita, the ambrosia which kept the gods alive. And sometimes he called it Sanjeevini, the rare herb mentioned in the epics which held at the nostrils could bring the dead to life. He never ceased to feel grateful to his father for planting a seedling in his time and providing him with a perennial source of twigs, enough for his generation and the next, considering the dimensions of the tree. He chewed its bitter leaves once a month as it destroyed all bacteria in the system, and he felt elated when the breeze blew. The air passing through the Margosa boughs became an anti-typhoid agent, and during the summer rains the place became fragrant as the little yellow flowers drifted down like flowers. He collected them, fried them in ghee, and consumed in ambrosia for all his worth once a week. His wife refused to associate herself with any of his health-giving activities. She hated his theories and lived her own life. Their first clash occurred when he forbade her to swallow aspirin and suggested that she should fry a little mogoza flower in ghee and swallow it for relief from headache. Seated beside the ancient pillar in their courtyard, she had knotted a towel around her temples and swayed madly back and forth, desperately begging for aspirin. Jagan was very sympathetic, no doubt, but was convinced that aspirin would do her no good. She had just looked up at him and said, "Oh, this headache is not half as unbearable as you talk. You would sooner see me dead, I suppose." "Your headache had made you crazy," he said, his temper rising. He hated her appearance with that silly towel knotted around her head and her disheveled hair. She looked ghoulish, and no wonder she suffered inexplicable headaches. He suddenly realized the trend of his thinking and suppressed it with a deliberate effort. "You may do what you like, only don't suffer." "Leave me alone," she said in reply. Jagan wanted to ask, "Why are you disgusted with me?" but passed on into Mali's room. Mali had insisted upon having a room of his own, and in that vast house it was not difficult to find him one. Mali got a long hall without a ventilator or window, known as its cool room in those days, which had a stone-topped round table at the center and a stool, and seemed delighted to be assigned this room, as it was near the kitchen and the main hall, and he could enjoy privacy without losing sight of all the goings on of the house, such as the arguments between his father and mother, or their conversation with visitors. He had a few books heaped on the round table and some house building blocks. Jagan had asked him, "Boy, do you know where your mother keeps her headache pills?" "I know, but she will not let me touch them." "Why?" "Because I may eat them. That's all. They look so nice." Jagan was scared. "Boy, don't you go near them. They are poison." "What's poison?" asked the boy innocently, looking up from a paper kite he was fiddling with. "Oh," Jagan said rather desperately. He tried to avoid uttering inauspicious words, but there seemed to be no other way. He said, "People die when they eat poison." Marley listened with interest and asked, "And then what?" as if listening to a story. Matters seemed to be proceeding in an unexpected direction. "Where are the pills?" Jagan asked. The boy indicated the cupboard in the hall and cried, "On the very top, so high that you all think I cannot reach them." Jagan found his son's attraction to aspirin ominous. He mercilessly replied, "I'll get you better things to eat than these pills. Forget it, and you understand?" Then he had gone to the cupboard and found the pills for his wife, but that was some years ago, and Mali had grown. End of chapter 2.